I have been hearing from many people who are concerned about the events in the world that we have witnessed since Donald Trump was inaugurated as president on January 20th. And they are asking for help how to deal with this in a more constructive way. And even here in Denmark, where I live, psychologists have reported that they have an increasing number of people who come to them seeking help to deal with this phenomenon, and they are the ones who actually coined this term, Trump Angst. So this video is exclusively for people who are worried about what might happen as a result of Trump becoming president, and I'm seeking to help you have a more constructive approach to it. If you are a Trump supporter, this video isn't for you. I'm not trying to change your mind on Trump. I don't think I can. I don't have any desire to, and I don't think I need to, because I think Donald Trump himself will change people's view of him, as I'll explain later. So how do we deal with insecurity in the world? We have two basic options. We can go into an emotional reaction where we create a spiral, where we become more and more concerned. Oh, this shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have said that. What's going to happen tomorrow? And it just takes you down. So if you want to avoid that kind of a reaction, which really doesn't help you, and it really doesn't help the situation either, the only way to really do this is to mentally step back and look at the situation from a larger perspective. That has always worked for me. I'm not saying it works for everybody, but that's what I'm going to try here, is step back and give you a larger perspective on the Trump presidency. And this larger perspective begins with my view of the world, but I'm also going to talk about some of the factors that I think will cause Trump to moderate himself and his policies based on what we've seen in the first month. And I will, in the end, talk about a potential positive outcome. So the larger perspective. I see planet Earth as an educational institution. This is schoolroom Earth. And there are certain ongoing lessons that humanity has been needing to learn for a long time. But there are also certain times in history where a certain group of people, they are confronted with these lessons in a more intense way. It's like, now you really can't ignore it anymore. And the lesson that I think Trump represents, both for the world, because other countries are in the same situation as the US, but especially for the US, is what kind of government do we want? And what kind of leaders do we want to have? And you can look at this in a historical perspective, and you can say, well, it's really a choice between some sort of autocracy or dictatorship and democracy. But it really isn't just about that, because if you step even further back, you can look at the situation in medieval Europe. You had kings. These kings were anointed by the Catholic Church, who claimed that a king was anointed by God, and therefore he was infallible. But you have many situations where the ego of one king was offended by the ego of another king. They went to war with each other. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and in the end, there was no consequential outcome of the war. So when you look at it from this perspective, the lesson we are facing in the world right now, and especially in America, is, do we want a form of government where the fate of our nation, the fate of our own people, perhaps even the fate of the world, depends on the ego of one man, usually men. Few women in history, but mostly men. Do we want that kind of a society, or do we want to broaden the number of people who are making important decisions, so that it's not as likely that one person's ego can cause very drastic consequences? And so I see democracy, the purpose of democracy is really to do this, to spread the decision-making body, so it's not as likely that one person can do something disastrous for the nation. And so the question is, have people learned that lesson? And specifically in America. Have the American people learned that lesson? Are they firmly dedicated to the democracy that the American Constitution actually defines? Because if you look at the American Constitution, you very clearly see that a primary goal for the founding fathers who wrote that Constitution was to make sure that an American president could not act as King George of England, who nearly destroyed the American nation before it was born. That is one of their primary goals. That's why you have the division of powers. So the primary goal was to make sure that important decisions and the direction of the nation could not be decided by one person, but there was many people that had to be involved in order to change the course of the nation, for example. So if the American people had a clear answer to these questions, do we really want democracy, or do we think it's better to have a person who has more power than the president is given in the Constitution? If they had a clear answer to this, Donald Trump wouldn't have been elected. But now we're standing with the fact that Donald Trump was elected, and he sits in the White House. So what does that mean? Well, that means, if we step back to the idea that planet Earth is a schoolroom, there are two ways you can learn in the schoolroom Earth. One is that you educate yourself, you look at history, you look at what has worked before, what has happened before. You, as the famous saying goes, you learn from the lessons of history so you don't have to repeat them. So this is what I call the school of higher awareness. We are expanding our awareness of how things work. The alternative to that is that we refuse to learn by raising our awareness. So we don't learn through the mind alone, we don't learn through ideas. This means we put ourselves in what I call the school of hard knocks. And in the school of hard knocks, we only learn when we are faced with physical consequences, either of our decisions or other persons, our leaders' decisions, or our unwillingness to make decisions. But we are faced, so we can learn either through ideas or we can learn through physical consequences. And by voting Donald Trump into office, the American people put America in the school of hard knocks. Of course, this will also affect the world because America is so connected to the world. So you're going to say, well, how is that supposed to help me deal with the situation better? Well, for me, I have not gone into this emotional reaction. Oh, look, Trump did this, Trump did that, what's going to happen? The way I look at it is very simple. The primary purpose of Trump's presidency is to push the American people to the point where there's a shift. So people say, yes, we are committed to democracy, and no, we don't want our own lives, the fate of our nation, and the fate of the world to be dependent on the ego of one man. So therefore, the way I look at it is, instead of being disturbed by Trump doing or saying extreme things, I look at it, okay, the harder he pushes, the more extreme he becomes, the more he speeds up the process of bringing the American people to a point where a critical mass of them have made that shift. I simply see that right now the purpose of Trump's presidency is to bring a critical mass of the American people to the point where they say, how could we ever have allowed a person like that to become president? And how can we make sure it never happens again? So you see what I'm saying? When you take this perspective, it's like instead of being disturbed by all of these things, you can say, okay, how many of the American people is his latest decision or his latest statement? Is it going to make them say, wow, this is too much. This isn't what we voted for. We never thought he was going to do this. Why is he doing this? So you see, instead of being disturbed by him becoming more and more radical, I'm actually encouraged by it because I think it won't take as long. See, before he got elected, I was thinking, okay, it's clear he's going to try and do a lot of things that he couldn't do in his first term. So I knew he was going to be more radical, more unbalanced. But really didn't think he would be as radical and as unbalanced as he has been in these first little over 5 weeks that he's been in office. So before he was elected, he was inaugurated, I thought maybe he won't be as radical, and therefore his presidency will be kind of like his first one, where people won't be that disturbed by it. But now we can see that's not going to happen. I mean, he is running full speed towards this point of no return. It's this old saying, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And therefore, I think it's inevitable that there will be a shift in the next 4 years, perhaps even much sooner. You can already see it starting to happen, and that's why I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So anyway, I just want to talk about some of the factors that I see that are already starting to push the American people towards that turning point, that recognition that this is too much. And I'll talk about 3 factors. I'll talk about Trump's mental state, Trump himself. I'll talk about the consequences of Trump's policies. And in the end, I'll talk about a positive outcome or how this situation might actually cause the American people to see what the real problem is in America and why so many people voted for Trump, because they were dissatisfied with the system. And I'll talk about what the real problem is that's been hiding. So let's talk about Trump's mental state. I know there's a lot of stuff out there about he has the signs of Alzheimer's or dementia, or he has narcissistic personality or disorder and this and that. But I'm just going to talk about 2 things. What you can actually observe from his first weeks as a president. And the first thing is there was a news conference, a press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu from Israel. And in the middle of this conference, Trump starts talking about, yeah, the US is going to take over Gaza, we are going to move the Palestinians out of there, and we're going to turn it into a world-class resort. And when you look at Netanyahu's reactions on that video, he seems genuinely surprised. I also read that Trump's own advisors, they didn't have any idea he was going to talk about this. So this shows me that probably Trump hadn't talked to anybody about this idea. So he gets an idea and he speaks it out in front of the world press without having sat down and considered, is this a feasible idea? What would it actually take to implement this idea? What would it cost to implement it? And to me, this shows that Trump is erratic. And he's becoming more erratic than he was during the campaign, but you could also see signs of it. So based on this, I think Trump is becoming more and more erratic. And he will become more erratic. And the more erratic he becomes, of course, the more it's going to awaken people to see that there's something here that just isn't working. We can't allow this to go on. And I think even among his own staff and his own cabinet, there's going to happen this. Because I already sense that there are people in the cabinet who are really afraid of putting him in front of a camera because they never know what he's going to say. So this is one thing. I think he will really become more and more extreme, more and more unbalanced, and make these statements that are clearly unrealistic, because anybody who really considers what it would take for the US to take over Gaza can see that it probably isn't even possible, but really it isn't desirable. Now, the other aspect is that you watch this now so famous Oval Office briefing with Trump, Vance, and Zelensky. And there's a point in there where Trump is talking to Zelensky, and you can see he's angry. He's really angry. And I don't recall, I haven't watched every video with Trump, obviously, but I don't recall ever seeing Trump that angry. Usually he's sort of cool, calm, and collected, standing a little bit back, and like he's in control of the situation. But here, he was clearly not in control of the situation. He was this close to losing it. I mean, really this close to losing it in front of open cameras. So this indicates to me that Trump is under enormous stress, or rather, Trump has put himself under enormous stress. And he's basically put himself in an impossible situation because he obviously wants to secure his legacy. He wants to be seen as the greatest president in American history. But he also sees that in order to do what he thinks is necessary, he has to get other people to agree to this. For example, ending the war in Ukraine. Now, they've had delegations over there talking to the Russians, and they have probably realized Putin isn't going to compromise. So therefore, Trump is now in a position, if I want a peace deal, I have to put pressure on Zelensky to get him to compromise. And so the whole purpose of inviting Zelensky to the White House was to beat him into submission, basically, get him to compromise. And when it became clear to Trump that Zelensky wasn't going to play ball, he almost lost it. And so what I'm saying is, when you look forward, there's going to be many more of these situations where Trump is going to face with this. I can't get through what I want to get through. Therefore, this is going to hurt my reputation, my legacy, and the stress is just going to keep building and building. And I think there's a real possibility that he could really have a mental breakdown. And this, of course, would also contribute to people waking up and saying, wait a minute, who is this guy? So that's Trump himself. Another thing that I think will happen when you talk about Trump's state of mind is that I think it'll become clearer and clearer to people that there's a lack of empathy. And I don't think this is going to be seen first with Trump. I think the one who's going to break the bank, so to speak, in this regard is Elon Musk. Because the way he's going about the whole Doge thing with the firings of these federal employees, it's clear that there is absolutely no concern for the fact that these federal employees are real human beings. They have families, they have mortgages, they have lives, but it doesn't matter to Elon Musk. He has a goal: reduce federal spending, beat the bureaucracy into submission so they'll do Trump's bidding, just like he did with Twitter when he took that over. And there is no humanitarian concerns whatsoever. There's no empathy. And I think many people already see that. But of course, as Trump is continuing to back him up and saying he wants him to be even more radical or aggressive, the arrow sooner or later is going to point to Trump. And people are going to realize he doesn't have any empathy, even with his own voters, because he doesn't care what the consequences are for real people. He's only looking at how is this going to make him look, how is he going to be able to carry through his policies. Okay, so now the next thing I want to talk about is the consequences of Trump policies. And I want to talk about three groups of Americans. Trump, of course, has a group of core supporters. They would have voted for him no matter what. But there were not enough of those to vote him into office. So therefore, he got voted into office partly because there was a lot of swing voters, as they call them, who voted for him this time. Some of them may have voted for Biden last time. Some of them may not have voted last time. But this time they voted for Trump. But when you look at interviews with these people, polls that have been done, you see that many of those are what you call single-issue voters. And most of them voted for Trump because they thought he would do a better job with the economy than Biden did. In other words, lower prices, improve their daily lives. They look back at Trump's first term and think the economy was better back then, which of course it was, because the economy worldwide was better before the corona crisis. And then they are thinking that Trump can fulfill his promises when he says, I'm going to lower prices on day one. So this was for most of these swing voters, this was the only reason they voted for him. They really don't care about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, taking over Greenland, or probably not even that concerned about illegal aliens. So what they see, and what many of them have started expressing now, is that after 5 weeks, Trump hasn't really done anything to lower prices. In fact, prices are going up, inflation is going up. And there is now talk that Trump's own policies may actually cause inflation to go up even more. He's even admitted that. He's even talked about it's actually patriotic to be willing to pay more. And I just don't think these voters look at it that way. So they are feeling he didn't fulfill his promise. Why did we vote for him? He isn't doing what he said he was going to do for us. So they already started changing their mind about Trump. Then the other group of voters are people who didn't vote and who are because they're indifferent to Trump. They didn't feel they could support him, but they didn't feel that he was such a big problem that they wanted to vote against him. And if you look at statistics, you can actually see that Trump always talks about he has a mandate now to remake America. He has a mandate for the people. But the fact is that out of the entire population of the US, only 22% of the people voted for Trump. Now, of course, many of those aren't eligible to vote because they're not old enough. But out of eligible voters, only 31% voted for Trump and 36% didn't vote. So there's a rather large group of Americans who are sort of on the fence. In other words, they don't really want to support Trump, but they don't think he's really that bad either. And what I see in the first 5 weeks here is that Trump is running full speed to force these people to get off the fence. Because he's doing so many things that I think are going to disturb these people that they are going to take a stand against him, whereas so far they haven't taken a stand. So then there's the third group of voters, and that is Trump's core supporters. And as I said in the beginning, I don't think there's anything anybody could say to change their minds about Trump. But nobody has to, because Trump will do it himself. And here's why. I have another video where I talk about why spiritual people support Trump. And what I say in that video is that Trump's entire psychology is that Trump is not willing to look at the beam in his own eye. He's always projecting out that the problem is out there. And most of the core Trump supporters are in that same state of mind. They don't think they have to change anything to improve conditions in America because it's other people's fault. It's those other people they have to change. And therefore, they voted for Trump because he has basically said that group of people is the problem, that group of people is the problem, and I'm going to do something about it. So Trump's core voters think Trump is going to solve the problem, but his policies are not going to affect us negatively. They really think that Trump can solve the problems in America in a way that doesn't have any negative consequences for them. And so what is going to change their view of Trump is when they experience on their own physical bodies, in their lives, that Trump's policies do have negative effects on them. Very, very negative effects on their personal lives. And so there are, of course, many reasons why this is going to happen. But let's just talk about a few of them. Just a few out of the many. One is this mass firing of federal employees, including reducing the size of the military. So obviously there are already people who voted for Trump thinking, yeah, he's going to reduce the size of the federal government, but he's not going to fire me. I voted for him. But the cuts that Musk is doing, they're just across the board. They don't care about anything. They're just firing here and there. So there are many people that have been fired by Trump. But there are also federal offices that have announced thousands of employees are going to be let go in a certain state. For example, the IRS has a big office in Georgia where they have announced 4,000 people are going to be fired. But many of these federal offices, they were placed deliberately in the poor states, the one with the lowest economy, in order to stimulate the economy in those states and give jobs. And those jobs are primarily Republican. Most of those states voted for Trump. But if you fire 4,000 employees in a state, well, first of all, they are going to be out of a job. They are applying for jobs, which means other people are going to have a harder time finding a job. But they're also going to stop spending, so local businesses are going to be pressed. Many of these people are going to have to move out of state to find another job. So now the housing market is going to be flooded with houses for sale. Prices are going to go down. And local businesses are some of them are just going to go bankrupt. Then another aspect of this is Trump has announced the biggest, I think the biggest savings on defense in history. Well, one of the really sore topics in American politics is military bases. Because again, many of these military bases are placed deliberately in states with poor economy. But if you're going to save that much money on the defense budget, you're going to have to close some military bases. And again, devastating effects on the economy. Lots of people who are not in the military have jobs because of these military bases. So right there. So then another thing that comes into this is Medicare and Medicaid. A lot of people who are not so well-to-do voted for Trump because they are dissatisfied with the system. But many of those are on Medicare and Medicaid or other government programs, other forms of government support. Then you have cuts to the veterans' benefits and services. Many veterans voted for Trump because they are patriots. They are many of them are traditional Republican voters because they are very patriotic, and that's why they volunteered to go in the army. Now they have served their country, they might have been wounded, and now they are seeing, what? Trump is going to cut our veterans' benefits. Then there's the other thing, which is, it seems, and I think more people will begin to see this, that Trump and Musk have not asked a simple question. Why do we have a federal government, and why does it have the size it has? Because the fact of the matter is that the United States has a federal government because the American people want certain services from their government. And for that matter, also the individual states wants a federal government who takes care of certain services like defense, national defense, weather service, Coast Guard, National Park Service, taxes, all this kind of thing. People and states want the federal government to provide these services. Well, if you are going to fire 10% of the federal workforce, what is the only possible outcome? There are some services that can't be provided. I mean, I know there's a video with Marjorie Taylor Greene who says that federal employees are not doing a real job and they don't deserve their paycheck. But they are actually doing a job. That's why they were hired. So just as one example, you fire 4,000 people in the IRS. Is this going to save the government money? Well, what were many of these people doing? They were bringing tax income to the federal government. If they are not there to do the job, it's obvious that there are people who are going to get away with not paying the taxes they should have paid. Is that going to save the government money or cost the government money? Okay, so then another topic. Again, there's so many, but just one. Deporting aliens. 11 million aliens. The essential question here is, well, there's two essential questions, but the first essential question is, who's going to do this? Is it even practically, logistically possible to do this? And there's been talks that local law enforcement, but that will mean there's other things they can't take care of, or the Army or the National Guard. But now there's been talk about hiring private security firms, like the ones who worked in Iraq and Afghanistan. So when you think about it, illegal aliens, 11 million all over yours, it's a huge undertaking. Logistically, it's a huge task. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost a lot of money, especially if you start using private contractors who only do it for profit. But then the other essential question is, what is going to be the effect on the economy? And here is actually a very real-life example. England withdrew from the EU a few years ago, Brexit, and the result of that was that there were a lot of people from Eastern Europe who had worked in England. They weren't even illegal. They were just working there because they were EU citizens. But they had to leave. And one effect of this was that British farmers, they had crops, they had fruits, they had berries that was sitting ripe on the fields, but they didn't have any low-paid workers to harvest them. What was the result? Prices went up. You have this situation in the United States where the majority of the fruits and vegetables that are sold in United States grocery stores are grown and harvested in California and Arizona. And most of them are harvested by foreign workers. Most of them probably illegal aliens. And you already have a situation now where these people are saying they can't get the workers they need because people don't dare to show up for work because they're afraid of being deported. If you can't harvest fruits and vegetables, supply goes down, demand stays the same, there's only one outcome. Prices go that way. So in other words, there's going to be some real life consequences here for everyday Americans. Then there's another thing I think about this with deporting the aliens. You know, right now it's fairly easy to go out and arrest some aliens and put them on airplanes. But this is going to become harder and harder and harder. So if you're really serious about doing this, you're going to have to take some measures that have never been seen in the United States. And that I think most of Trump supporters will be violently opposed to, because many Trump supporters, they believe the government should stay out of our lives. They should leave us alone. We have a right to have our guns. We have the right to have our privacy. But if you're really serious about deporting that many aliens, there's going to be a point where a Trump supporter comes driving in his pickup truck with his rifle hanging in the back window and a bale of hay in the back, and he's going to be stopped. There's going to be a roadblock. And there's going to be unmarked black SUVs, and there's going to be private security employees in black uniforms. And when he rolls down his window, they're going to say, "Show me your papers." And now he's going to have to prove that he's actually an American citizen. And how is he going to do that? Well, he has a driver's license probably in his car, but that doesn't prove he's a citizen. He might have a social security card in his wallet. That doesn't prove you're a citizen. So unless he carries around his birth certificate, he can't prove it, unless he also has his passport. But many of these people don't have a passport. So, and a birth certificate is very easy to forge. So if they really want to get rid of aliens, they can't take a birth certificate. It's just not enough ID. So what this can lead to is, if you're serious about getting rid of these aliens, you have to create a national ID card. This now means that anybody who doesn't want to risk being arrested and put in a deportation camp is going to have to go to a federal office, going to give their name, their address, bring legitimation, and they're going to have their photo taken, their fingerprints taken, perhaps even a DNA sample while we're at it. How does that sit with Trump voters who thought we were going to get the government out of our lives? So again, another rung of people can say, oh, wait a minute, what are we doing here? So anyway, so now let's talk about another topic. I lived in America for 22 years. I know that there's not as much international news in America because it's such a big country as there is in a small country like Denmark, for example. But I still, was my experience that many Americans really care about America's standing in the world. And many Americans are patriotic. Why are they patriotic? Because they're proud of America being the defender of freedom and democracy around the world. Many have either themselves fought or they have family members, parents, grandparents who fought in the wars, and they're proud of Americans standing in the world. So I think many of these people are going to be concerned when it dawns on them what dawned on me here the other day. And what I realized was the United States of America is no longer a superpower. Just think about that. I grew up during the Cold War. There were two superpowers, USSR, USA. USA was the good guys. They were the ones, we still had a democracy, and that we weren't speaking German or speaking Russian. Then the USSR collapses in 1990, so for 35 years we had a situation where America has been the only superpower. But that has ended now. We know that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin for quite a number of years, they have been trying to take down America's superpower status and raise their other countries up so they could be rivaling superpowers. But for all their efforts, Trump accomplished this in 1 month after he was sworn in. And why am I saying this? Well, I'm saying it because America's superpower status rested on 2 pillars. One was America was feared by dictatorships, non-democratic nations. And they were feared because America had a clear commitment to defending democracy and freedom. And America, of course, had a large military, and they feared what America would do if they attacked another democratic nation, especially if it was in NATO. And they also felt that America was not like them. It didn't have the same kind of government as them. But what has Trump done? He especially sown doubt about whether America will actually honor its commitments in NATO, which sows doubt about any other defense of democratic nations around the world. I know people in South Korea are worried about America's commitment. And so then Trump has expressed admiration for Putin and Xi Jinping. And it's not hard for people to see that he actually wants the same kind of powers in America that they have in their countries. Lately, America voted, along with Russia and Iran and North Korea, in a UN resolution. And then Trump has announced the biggest cuts in the defense budget, I think, in history. So these autocratic leaders, the deterrence is gone, and they're just thinking, how much can we get away with now? So this is one thing. The other pillar of America's superpower status was, of course, the democratic world was looking up to America and felt they could trust America. Well, I don't know how many democratic leaders today trust America as long as Trump is president. Certainly not most of the countries in Europe, where how can we even know? Is NATO effectively dead now? So you see, based on this, America doesn't have superpower status, except maybe in the eyes of Trump and his supporters, but I think that will shift. So when Trump talks about make America great again, are you really making America great by destroying its status as a superpower? Now, a couple of other things that I think will cause people to shift their attitude to Trump. Trump has made a lot of promises in the campaign. In fact, he made so many promises that you could say he couldn't possibly fulfill all of them. But more than that, he made some promises that are directly contradictory. I already mentioned one. If you want to lower prices and at the same time deport the illegal aliens who are harvesting fruits and vegetables, these are contradictory. I mean, you really can't do it, right? And then if you want to, you're promising to improve people's lives, but at the same time you're promising to reduce the size of the federal government, which will inevitably lead to many people who are losing the benefits and services they got from the federal government. These are contradictory promises. One way he wants to reduce the federal budget is to cut this international aid. Well, for one thing, this has sent shockwaves through the poor part of the world, where many people will starve to death without this aid, which also, by the way, takes down America's superpower status. But Trump is portraying it, and Musk is portraying like, this is just money out the window for America. Well, first of all, it's buying influence and goodwill, but much of the aid is food aid, and much of that food is purchased from American farmers, who have been used to knowing, when I plant crops, I can sell it to USA, I can get a fair price for it. Now there are farmers who say, I don't know if I should plant crops this spring. And I don't know if I get the bank to loan me the money to buy the seeds, because if they don't think I can sell it, they won't give me the money. And again, where are most of the farmers? They are in the less affluent states, mostly states who voted for Trump. Is it going to affect them directly? Oh yeah, it's a snowball that's going to keep rolling. Then there is another aspect is Trump has, whatever you want to call it, Trump has a specific attitude to facts and truth. And he has made many, many statements that are just factually incorrect. And I think as we go along, more and more people are going to see this. One of the obvious ones is tariffs. I mean, he said so many times, China is going to pay the tariffs. The rest of the world is going to pay America back for everything we've done for them. But all economists say, and you can think about this logically, tariffs would have to be collected by the US Customs. The US Customs has no authority to go into China and say to a Chinese manufacturer, if you want to export your goods to America, you have to pay tariffs. So what the Customs Service can do is to go to the company, the American company that imports those goods from China and say, you have to pay tariffs. So the American company is paying the tariffs. Now the question is, will the American company settle for a cut in its profits, or will it increase the price for wholesalers and consumers? So pretty much all economists agree that it's likely to increase prices. Directly contradictory promises. Then there are some actions that are directly contradictory, that really contradict the narrative that Trump has given. And again, there's a lot of examples of this, but just one that I thought was interesting. Because I remember when January 6, 1921 happened, the storm of the Congress building. I was really shocked by this because I've lived in America, I love American democracy, I love what America stands for, and I really love Washington, D.C. and the Congress building and the mall area. I just think, for me, it's like a symbol for democracy. So when I saw these people break down the windows, break down the doors, attack these people, put their feet up on offices of elected officials, I was really appalled and shocked. But I knew people who were actually there outside, and they were convinced that this was not Trump supporters that broke into the Capitol building. These were Antifa people that were sent there to give Trump and Trump supporters a bad name. They were absolutely convinced of this. I think probably they're still convinced of this. So in their minds, and in the minds of many Trump supporters, the people who broke into the Capitol building were Antifa people. But the fact is that many of these people were arrested and put in jail. And what was one of the first things Trump did after he got into the Oval Office? He pardoned all of them, even the ones who had been violent, which some in his own government said they shouldn't actually be released. But Trump pardoned all of them. So if Trump really believed that they were Antifa supporters, why would he have pardoned them? Why not leave them in jail? So in other words, Trump has admitted, by pardoning him, he has admitted, these were my most devoted supporters, and I'm really grateful for the fact that they stood up for me by breaking the law and basically committing an act of anarchy. Because otherwise he wouldn't have pardoned them. So it's a glaring contradiction there. And there's, of course, others as well. So I think if we look at it from a slightly bigger perspective, I think what's going to start emerging from all of these people who are going to be personally affected by Trump policies is the question, does Trump really care about people, even his own voters? Or is he driven by a desire to what? I don't think you can really say Trump has a clear ideology. I think what will start to emerge is that Trump, first of all, cares about himself, his own reputation, his own standing. He wants to be seen as the greatest president in American history. And this is really what he cares about. And he thinks he has a certain way that this is going to happen, and he's not really concerned about the human consequences. So this is always going to shift people. Okay, so now what can moderate Trump's policies? And really, one factor is what I just talked about. Trump wants to be seen as the greatest American president. And so basically, this is Trump's ego. Trump is using the presidency to gratify his own ego. And his ego can also, it's on the one hand, it's what drives him to be more and more radical. But it can also flip and cause him to moderate himself. If he thinks that his policies are making him too unpopular, if his approval ratings go way down, if there's more and more protests where he feels like his goal of becoming the greatest president can't happen by pushing a certain policy, he is going to flip and moderate it. So this is one thing. And the reason why I'm talking about this is it gives me a cause for optimism, a certain guarded optimism that Trump's breakneck pace in the first 5 weeks isn't going to continue. Now, another thing that will moderate Trump, and I was actually asked by somebody in an interview what I thought about the people who say that Trump can solve all of the problems or that Trump will destroy American democracy. I said, well, these people, if they think that Trump has that kind of power, they haven't read the Constitution. Because as I said earlier, the goal of the Founding Fathers when they wrote the Constitution was to make sure that no American president could ever start acting like King George of England, who had all power and who thought he was infallible, and who didn't care about the consequences. So clearly, the American democracy has survived for 250 years. I am fairly confident that it will survive Donald Trump. And you can see already that Trump is heading for a showdown with the Supreme Court. He thinks probably that he has great influence in the Supreme Court. There's a majority of conservative judges. Trump appointed 3 of them. But the Supreme Court judges are first of all loyal to the Constitution. So if Trump does something that violates the Constitution, they will have to rule against him, or they will basically destroy the Supreme Court. And then there's the question, will Trump obey the court's rulings? And Vance has already said that the president doesn't think so, and in this 2025 plan, they are saying the president has no obligation to obey the courts. But there are also people who can clearly see that if that happens, America is in a full-blown constitutional crisis. And again, surveys have shown, polls have shown that a large majority of Americans, over 75%, believe that the president should obey the rulings of the Supreme Court. So again, if Trump does that, if he defies the Supreme Court rulings, his popularity is going to drop. I mean, there's no question about it. More and more people are going to say, oh my goodness, we can't let this go on. Then, of course, there's Congress and the Senate, which is the other branch of the government that's meant to limit the powers of the president. And I know people can say, but he has a majority, the Republicans have a majority in Congress and the Senate. Yes, the Republicans have a majority. Trump doesn't. It's not necessarily the same thing. Because Trump isn't going to be standing for election in 4 years. In fact, he can't be re-elected, so he doesn't have to worry about re-election. But many Republican congressmen and senators are up for re-election in 2 years at the midterm election. Now, you've already seen these scenes where they faced these town hall meetings and they were criticized by their own supporters, by their own voters. Now, I know that some Republicans will say, oh, this was all staged, these were paid actors, but it really isn't. There's just too many of these, and it's actually getting, more and more people are showing up to voice their discontent. So Trump is pushing the Republican Party and Republican congressmen and senators to face this simple question. If I continue to support these very unpopular policies of Trump, I'm not going to be re-elected in 2026. Which also forces the Republican Party to say, but you know what, Trump? If you don't moderate your policies so these congressmen can be re-elected, they're not going to be here to support you in 2 years, which means that the Democrats could win a majority and you become a lame duck president, which historically is what has happened to most presidents, both Democrats and Republicans. So I think, right now, the pace of these first 5 weeks of Trump's presidency has been so overwhelming that nobody can really keep up with it. So I think there's just chaos in the Republican Party. They don't know how to deal with it. But I think over time they will have to face these very hard realities. And if they don't, I think it's overwhelmingly likely that they will lose the majority. It could even happen that the Democrats would get a large enough majority to impeach Trump. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. And if Trump becomes more and more radical, certainly some Republicans could vote for impeaching him. One of the things that I think could do this is his support for Putin. If he comes up with some kind of peace deal that clearly favors Putin and basically allows him to take over Ukraine, I think he will become very, very unpopular. Because again, Republicans are traditionally more patriotic, and I think there are certainly Republicans, senators and congressmen who grew up in a Cold War, who understand that Russia isn't really somebody that we can trust. Then I think another thing that will start happening is that there will become, as we saw to some degree in the first Trump presidency, internal conflicts in the administration. And I think we'll see it more this time because, as I said, Trump is more and more radical. And I think this will obviously start with Musk. You could really seriously debate who has the biggest ego, Trump or Musk. And it's obvious that at one point, these are going to clash. And there's really no question about it. It's going to be a power struggle. And obviously, Trump is the elected president, and Musk is not elected, so it can only end one way. Musk leaves in a huff. And then what does he start to do? Does he start criticizing Trump or whatever? But I also think there's going to be more interest and strife in the administration itself, because it's going to be more and more this that Trump comes up with these very radical decisions or very erratic decisions, and the ones who have to carry it out are the cabinet members and the administrators in the administration. And so what's going to happen to some of these is that Trump is going to decide this is what we're going to do. It's an impossible task, but then he's saying, you have to do this. So he puts somebody in charge of doing an impossible task, and what's going to happen is when they can't do it, Trump is going to blame them. Trump is literally going to blame his own people when they can't do what he wanted them to do. And I think there are people who are going to simply break under the strain. I also think that there's going to be people who come to a point where their view of Trump and his capacity and his, whatever you want to call it, infallibility, is going to be punctured. I mean, they're simply going to come and see that he really has some severe problems here, and he is not the kind of leader they thought he was. You already see to some degree that there are people who are, their main task seems to be to explain away some of the things Trump said or that he wants to do. That he's not really going to do that. He's not really serious about that. Or they are trying to explain why it's good. I mean, you see after the Zelensky meeting that now there are Republican congressmen and senators who are trying to defend Trump, whereas just the day before they had expressed great admiration for Zelensky and support for Ukraine. So there's simply going to be all of these contradictions where Trump is going to force people to choose. Will you be loyal to Trump, or will you be loyal to your principles? And I think some people are going to switch. I also think people out there are going to see this and see that this isn't feasible. Then, of course, another thing that can very well force Trump to moderate his policies is the economy. I mean, you have the saying in America, it's the economy stupid, because in the end, the only thing that matters of whether you get elected is the economy. So as I said, there are some swing voters, but all voters, of course, will be concerned if Trump does something that seems to really be a threat to the economy. I'm not a stockbroker, I'm not an investor, but what I have learned over the years is that investors don't like uncertainty. They want to have a predictable leader in the White House so they can know what's going to happen to the country. And so it is very possible that Trump does something, like, for example, tariffs, that could cause the stock market to really drop seriously. And of course, other businesses could suffer under tariffs. There's been talk that if he enacted a 25% tariff against Canada and Mexico, the average car in America, the price would increase with $3,000. So things like this, when people see that Trump's policies are really going to hurt the economy, then it could lead to problems. And as I said, the mass firings will also create a domino effect in the economy that will lead in, maybe not on a national level, but certainly in many of these poor states, will hurt the economy. Then there's another aspect of the economy that I think is worth mentioning, and that is the defense industry. Trump has announced, as I said, probably the biggest cuts to defense spending ever. What is that going to mean? Well, that means that what Truman called the military-industrial complex are now obviously concerned about their profits. If they can't sell weapons or services to the Department of Defense, how can they compensate for this? Their profits are going to go down, they might go out of business. How can they compensate? So they are looking for other markets. And right now you have a situation in Europe where there's been a universal shift that Europe has to come to a point where it can defend itself against Russian aggression. And that means that basically all countries in Europe are committed to increasing their defense spending, buying lots of weapons over the next 4 years. So obviously if you are the head of a large defense company in America, you will say, aha, here's our chance. We can sell to the Europeans and compensate for the loss we get to the federal government. The only problem is that what caused these European leaders to commit to this defense spending was that they feel they can't trust Trump. They can't trust NATO under Trump. So therefore they are saying, we have to make ourselves independent of the United States. In other words, we can't buy weapons from the US because we don't know if Trump is going to use those weapons to blackmail us, like he's already tried to do with Ukraine. We're going to withhold aid, or Musk is going to shut down Starlink for Ukraine. And the European leaders are saying, we can't afford this. So in other words, they are saying, we can't buy weapons from American contractors because we don't know what's going to happen here. So I think the defense industry would also put pressure on Trump and on the Republican Party, but I also think that as they start losing government contracts, they're obviously going to fire people, and again, this is going to roll through the economy. So anyway, that's probably more than I really should have said on all of this, but obviously there's a lot. You could go on and on and on. So I just want to end on a note. I think what I've said so far is really a positive note because, as I said, even though this leads to problems, even though this really affects a lot of people, everything will push America to that point where there is this shift, where people look at what Trump is doing, look at what he has done, and say, how did we ever allow a person with his psychology to become president, and how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? So with this, I just want to say one more thing. I understand fully why many people voted for Trump, why many Americans voted for Trump. And they did this because they are dissatisfied with their daily situation. For decades, American people were increasing their standard of living. But for now, several decades, at least a couple of decades, we now have a generation of Americans, young Americans, who are seeing my standard of living is going to be lower than my parents. There are more and more people who are sinking into poverty, who are working in these dead-end jobs, who are having to make two jobs just to make ends meet, and so on. So I fully understand why many people are dissatisfied, and why many people feel that the Democratic Party hasn't done enough to change that situation, even though they traditionally seem to be the Workers' Party. And I think, honestly, the Democratic Party has failed in that regard. So that's why these people have now come to believe Trump when he says, number one, I can fix this problem, and number two, the reason for the problem is the government, the deep state, the system. It's the system that's against you. And I'm not even saying this is completely not the case. The system is part of the problem, but it's not for the reason that Trump brings out. And what I base this on is well, partly observations of what's happened, but also there's an American think tank. It's actually a conservative think tank that's called the RAND Corporation, R-A-N-D. And they, a few years ago, published a report on income inequality or income distribution. You can easily find it on the internet, RAND Corporation and income distribution. And there's a lot of surveys, a lot of data in the report, but the bottom line, if you want to boil it down to one sentence, is that over the last 40 years, from 1975 and onwards, the top 10% of the American elite, the power elite, the financial elite, they have siphoned $50 trillion worth of wealth from the bottom 90% of the American population up to themselves. So there's been an enormous shift in the equality of income and wealth in the US. And this is why you have a generation of Americans who feel that their standard of living will be lower than their parents. It's not the government that's created this, it's the power elite. So in other words, the real problem in America is not really the government. It is the power elite that's the problem. And I think many Americans are beginning to see this. There is already people who talk about America is effectively an oligarchy. And I think actually Trump's own actions are going to bring this along. And there's two reasons for it. Congress just recently passed a new budget, spending bill, whatever you call it. It hasn't been passed by the Senate yet as I'm saying this, but it may be. And in that, there is enormous cuts, hundreds of billions of dollars to Medicare and Medicaid. But at the same time, there's $4.5 trillion worth of tax savings and tax cuts for the very rich. And I think many people are going to see this as, how is this helping us? We, the ordinary people, we voted Trump into office because he promised to improve our situation. How is giving tax cuts to the rich improving our situation when at the same time you're taking federal benefits, you're taking federal services, you're taking jobs, and this and that. So this is one thing. I think the other thing that's going to happen is that people are going to see that Trump is, of course, well, I don't know if he is a billionaire, but he certainly would like to present himself as a billionaire. And he has nominated, is it 10 people, 10 billionaires to be part of his cabinet? And then, of course, there's Elon Musk, who's not part of the cabinet, but who is now slashing and gashing the federal government. So I think more and more people are going to say, wait a minute here. The reason why we have a lower standard of living is that all this money has gone up to the billionaires. How could we ever believe that the billionaires are going to fix this problem? And therefore they're going to see that Trump isn't going to fix this problem because he has sided with the billionaires. And I think this is going to lead to a shift, and this is why I think this is a positive outcome. If people realize that the problem right now in terms of the living standard of most Americans is really this wealth being funneled up through the power elite. And there's many ways this is done. I'm not going to go into it here. But I think people are going to see this, and they're going to say, we have to do something about this. And as I said, it's not that Trump is wrong for saying that the system is part of this problem, but what is it that's wrong with the system? Well, it's not the size of the federal government. It's not that you have a federal government. It's not that the federal government is taken over by left-leaning people. No, it's that the federal government is, of course, an extension of the political branch, Congress, the Senate, and the presidency. And that the political branch is way too influenced by these very rich people. And this happens in several primary ways. First of all, campaign contributions. Situation in the US is if you're ever going to be elected to Congress and the Senate, you have to accept money for campaign contributions from some very rich people. They want something in return. Then there's lobbying. Enormous amount of money is being spent by lobbying groups to influence Congress and the Senate. In most other democracies, they have done everything they can to eliminate the influence of money on politics. And America hasn't done that to the extent that other democracies have. And I think people are going to be able to see that if we want a real democracy where it is not, if we want a democracy that's of the people, by the people, and for the people, and not of the elite, by the elite, and for the elite, we have to change certain things. We have to get the influence of money out of politics. And I think this is already beginning to happen. And I think it's going to be seen that neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party have seriously done anything about this. The Democrats have talked a little bit about it, but they haven't really done that much. And I think it's because people are going to see that both parties are really bought by the elite. And of course, people are also going to see that much of the big media outlets are also bought by the elite. They're owned by the elite. I mean, Jeff Bezos owns a large newspaper, right? So it's clear that what you're going to be seeing, I think, in the next 4 years, as it's become more and more obvious to people that Trump isn't solving the problem he promised he was going to solve. And therefore, people are going to be saying, why? Well, it's because we have to take back our government from the elite. And I think that can be a positive development. So anyway, I hope this has helped you reduce your worry rather than increase your worry.